going. We're going.
Okay,
Go.
brilliant. Okay, thanks a million. That's great now. So it's just great to be able to see you.
And I have a halo, so that's good. Yeah. Okay.
You have lovely light in that room. Okay, I'm going to kick off because we're just a few minutes in. We've about 50 people online, which is great. Thanks a million to everybody for tuning in, and maybe some more will log on because we have over 100 registered. So I think some people will watch the playback as well if they don't come online.
I see,
yeah. So I'm just going to intro myself, and then I'll intro Mary Kate for people who don't know her. I'm Nicola Cassidy. I'm the Meath Writer-in-Residence for 2020. Up till Christmas of this year. So I have 3 novels published. I'm an historical fiction writer, but I absolutely love film and TV, and I've always wanted to eventually get into TV writing and and film writing. And with lockdown this year, I finally got time to give it a go and to try and study it. And that's how I met Mary Kate. And that's why we're here today, because we're going to look at some of the foundations and the absolute basics of screenwriting and what makes a good screenwriter and what makes a good script. And hopefully we'll get through Mary Kate's thoughts on that. I'm going to introduce Mary Kate. I'm so happy to have her here today with us and to be able to see her. She's an award-winning writer and story consultant. She's Ireland's first Grand Slam champion storyteller at the Moth and the Grand Slam champion storyteller at the Moth in Los Angeles. And that's available to hear, isn't it, Mary Kate? Because I've listened to that. It's up online.
Yeah, you can hear it on themoth.org. Yeah, or you can hear all my stories on Soundscape, you know. But,
we can share that out because I'll have resources after this, and it's absolutely brilliant. I recommend anyone to read it or to listen to it. It's really good. She works with writers in the UK, the US, South Africa, and across Europe. You're accredited co-writer and uncredited script doctor. And with your sister, Rachel O'Flanagan, you give training in storytelling skills for professionals in cinema and television. And if you check out dramaticimprovement.com, that's your website, and there's loads of resources on that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but you've got some upcoming courses, and we're going to get into that at the end.
And also
because we're going to talk about training in this.
Yeah, my sister Rachel is online. She's joining us. She didn't realize that I was doing this, but when she saw it, she was like, "Hey, I'm coming too." So hi, Rachel.
Oh, great! That's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's just we can't see people,
probably put things in the chat, you know, if there are things that I forget.
Yeah. So we have the chat. It's live, and last week we were doing short story, and they were coming thick and fast. So if we get time, we can go through them, and there's some really kind of good questions that I don't think of that people are asking. So so just for today, we don't have too long, and obviously, I mean, I'm after doing weeks of training with you, so we could go in any direction. But what I really want to do with this webinar is start at the basics. So people who, like me, go, I'd love to write a script, but I've absolutely no idea either where to start or how to go about it. And I'd really just like to look at the tools, the resources, the training that you really need to be starting with if you want to end up being with a script in your hands. So I'm hoping we can get through that. And in our training, and just to give a bit of background, I'm a novel writer, and I just thought, well, that means I probably would be very good at writing scripts because I know how to write. And when I started taking your courses, I quickly realized that it's not so simple. And I think probably screenwriting is one of the types of writing that you really need to train in. Like, I think with novel writing or short stories, you can sit down even with a page and just write out a story, and you can kind of just access it really quickly. With screenwriting, you need to know the basics before you can start. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think the thing is,
the technical kind of what makes a story, like,
well, I
don't
because
you have to have it ready to present on screen.
Well, I don't want to scare people about the technical stuff, because I think that's kind of, you could learn it in like an hour, you know, and that's not the thing that has different demands. I think the thing is, to be a prose writer, you have been training for that your whole life because you're a reader, you know. And so the fact is, like, you know, and like, it's a little bit like, you know, like, people have different talents in different areas, but the people that are on this call almost certainly were the people who liked reading and liked writing, you know. And so you actually have been, and it's certainly what school teaches you. So even if you know, didn't go on to study literature at university or anything, school teaches you to write stories. So you learn to write prose stories, and every time you're consuming a prose story, and I'm assuming again most of the people on this call are great readers, you are giving yourself training. You're just taking in how do stories work. What do I like? What works for me? What doesn't work for me. So you are actually taking all of that in all along. But you are 100% right, Nicola, to say that the demands on the shape of a story in a novel are quite loosey goosey, I think. So you can write a novel that's like 500 pages long, and you can write a novella that's like, maybe 50 or 60 pages long. Um, and you can take like a big long digression in the middle of a story to go into somebody's backstory and their parents and everything that's happening in the middle of a novel. And cinema and television doesn't allow you to do that. So the thing that I think that people who have been writing, and I would say, by the way, I think you do know how. I think you do know, but you need to clarify your thinking. Perhaps is the way to think of it. I think everybody knows how to tell a story, but it's good to clarify your thinking. So the thing with cinema and television, and the ways in which it differs from, say, theatre or novels or short stories, is that there's a demand for the plot to move forward constantly. So you can't stop as you might in a novel and describe a beautiful picnic so that the reader feels like, I'm really there. I feel that. I can hear the bees droning. I can, feel the warmth of the summer day. By and large, cinema will communicate that so quickly and so effectively that then you've got to keep the story moving. So I think it's understanding that the demands on story are different. And one of the things I think that's very interesting, and I think most people instinctively know this, or know this at a slightly below conscious level, is like we're brilliant at theatre in this country. And one of the reasons we're brilliant at theatre is because it's an art form that requires very little money. You just need, like, you can we'll put the play on right here, right? And we've been a relatively, poorer country compared to somewhere like Italy or Austria, where there's been like massive wealth being thrown at various different arts, and they've got great histories of opera. We're really good at theatre, but you can go to the theatre and see a brilliant, brilliant play and be absolutely have your cotton socks knocked off. And then somebody makes a film of it, and it's like, oh, and I think it's really interesting to observe that the thing that works in the theatre or the thing that works on the page won't automatically directly translate to what's going to work on the screen.
Okay, so what are the, I suppose, what, like, things that I've learned in the course are about, and we there was a week where we looked at Charlie Chaplin, and for me that was like almost a cornerstone. I went, oh my God, I get it now. I get how this writing works, because obviously with the when there wasn't any dialogue, everything was visual. And then I went, just imagine you're trying to write like that, you don't have dialogue, or you don't have, you have the card. So that clicked for me. Then I went, I understand now how to interpret that and put that on the page. Does that make sense? Like what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah, and I'm so delighted that like
you have to go visually rather than it was a lovely day, and all your prose that I'm just used to kind of writing as a writer. So that was the switch for me from being novel to screen. Just go think of Charlie Chaplin.
Think of Charlie Chaplin, and for people who like the specific scene that we're talking about is the first entrance of his character in the film The Kid. And I always say I could give like a 3-hour masterclass just on that clip. But I'm so delighted that you took it that way. But it's like what you have to do in cinema is you have to externalize the internal. So in a novel, you can say it was a lovely day, but he was worried about how he was going to get enough money for lunch that day. And I often see this in screenplays by relatively inexperienced, but sometimes people should know better. That I'll see this in screenplays. It's a beautiful day, but David can't enjoy it because his girlfriend just broke up with him. And I'm like, what does the camera see? Maybe David's got a hump on him. Do you know what I mean? But you what you can do is you write that it's a beautiful day. David walks past, a poster for a romantic movie, and looks like he's going to cry, and then there'd be a couple of other clues like that, you know. So you know, the first thing is like that we're trying to externalize people's thought processes. And of course, the first thing that all of us do is we use dialogue, you know, that we give him a buddy and he says to his buddy, I'm having a terrible day because my girlfriend broke up with me. But that's not really, that's theatre rather than cinema, you know. Um, and the other thing is that we're trying to externalize people's feelings. And of course, there are things that happen inside them. And prose is so beautifully suited to explain people's feelings. I mean, it goes back to that lovely C.S. Lewis quote, we read to know that we're not alone. So when I'm reading prose, I get to be in the person's head and in their heart and experience their feelings with them. But what cinema requires is for that to be written in a way that it's the juxtaposition of different props and spaces and characters. And the lovely thing about it then is that the audience comes out to meet it, you know? Like what I'm always interested in is how is the audience participating in the story? And rather than somebody speaking their feelings and thoughts, which apart from anything else is just not very natural, most of the time, most of us conceal our true feelings and thoughts, including from
Say
ourselves.
the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just like, I mean, you know, when people say like I never lie, and I'm like, really? How are you? And they're like, I'm fine. I'm like, are you? You
Yeah.
know? Like, you know, so like, you know, so most of us appropriately probably, you know, we're entitled to our privacy. We conceal our feelings and thoughts. And the art of storytelling on screen is to show the audience things where they go, aha, aha, ha, 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 ha. I know she's not fine. I know she's not, you know, and that's, I think, where it gets really fun for the audience. You know, people talk a lot about the audience doesn't want to be spoon fed, you know, and I think that's part of the art of storytelling on screen. I think part of
Okay.
it, yeah.
You mentioned it's, you know, scriptwriters starting off might explain something rather than, and you're trying to work out how will that show on screen. Is there any other things that early scriptwriters do that they shouldn't, or that are kind of rookie mistakes?
Well, the
Or is
thing,
that too negative a question?
I don't know. I don't think it's too negative a question. I mean, the first thing that I think for any writer is you have to give yourself permission to rewrite. You know, the thing that I always want to say to people is you can do better than your first try, you know, so just start with that. Like, so one of the things that Rachel and I would often see is that somebody comes with something quite promising and then they're super defended and they don't want to change anything. And they're like, no, you don't understand my vision. And it's like, yeah, and I do this for a living, so there's a good chance that nobody in the audience is going to understand your vision, you know, and that's our job, is to help make sure that your vision is, you know, 100% clear. So one of the things is that the people aren't very malleable, you know, they get very defended of the very first thing that they write, and that is something that I always ask writers to keep repeating them to themselves, is I can do better than my first try, I can do better than my first try, you know. And you know, Nicola, you've had the experience of, like, you know, it is kind of terrifying when you have something and it's new and you're just creating it and you're like, please don't poke at it, you're going to make my souffle collapse, you know. But
Back
there's
off.
yeah, but there's always, like, you know, there's always a solution, there's always a plot solution, those things are easy, you know. The other thing that I think that when I see very, like, and you know, people who are less experienced in screenwriting, is that they front load their story with loads and loads of information. So, and I've done this myself, you know, and I mean, I've had a lot of fun working with television writers in Hollywood. And when I first started working with these writers, I was like, I don't know what I can tell you. You've got 5 Emmys. Do you know what I mean? But television writers always think in long form stories. So they're always thinking about what would be a great storyline, what would be a great scene, what would be a great episode. And they don't think beginning, middle, end, you know, because the idea, and certainly in Hollywood, is that you'll get like another season, another one, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I was house sharing with someone on the Mad Men team when they were writing season 7, and they were like, how
No
will
way.
we end it? How will we end it? How will we end it? They were tearing their hair out because they never expected to get more than first season, you know? So it's not how
Yeah.
television writers think. And I thought that was really interesting. Anyway, I was working with this writer and I was like, you spend a lot of time explaining why these two young women share a flat. And she was like, yeah. And I was like, and it's taking a really long time then to get to the meat of your story. Because the meat of the story was far more interesting, which is like they start playing kind of sexy daredevil games with the neighbor across the way, right? You know, somewhere in Manhattan, you know, and it's like they're up in the game with each, like, you know, letting him see them, you know, in intimate moments and things like this. And it's really a game between the two of them. That's where the story gets interesting. But it was taking us like 40 pages, which would be about 40 minutes of screen time to get there. And I was like, why do you spend so long explaining why they share a flat? And she was just like, oh yeah, because people share flats. And I was like, yeah. You know, there was a whole thing that this person's accommodation had fallen through and that person was going to go to college, but she decided she didn't want to do a master's. And there was just like loads and loads of stuff. And I think people do that a lot. And I think I always say to people, like, that's not wasted time. You got to know your characters while you were doing that,
Yeah.
you know. So it's great that you did all that work. It's really, really great. But you may not need it all in your next draft, you know, like that's all
Yeah.
valuable work. So I think that's something that people do a lot. Is it's like, I mean, she was laughing, she was like, I should write a new draft, so there was a big bang. Right? And I'm like, yeah, you don't need to explain everything that led up to this. And in fact, you can get a lot of backstory in quite late. I would encourage people to look at movies that they love and look at how they're still unpacking backstory well into the second half of the movie, you know? So
Mhm.
you just need to sit down and go, okay, what's the absolutely essential information that the audience needs for me to get my movie going? I think that's one. And I think you were talking about training. I mean, of course, anybody could teach themselves, but that is a laborious process, you know. And there are books on our website that, you know, we can just refer people to, but I think having someone else's eye, you know, to go, and often that can be your buddy as long as you're kind with each other, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but I also do think it's important to, I think it's important to ask people to answer objective questions when you show your work to other people.
How do you
So,
mean? Does
so
does the story hit these points? Is that what you mean?
yeah, yeah, exactly that. Yeah, because like if you like, here's my experience, right? If I give my work to a friend and go, tell me what you think, most of my friends will go, it's really great, it's brilliant, you're brilliant, because they're my friends, and the project doesn't get any better. And a couple of them will go, yeah, it's really weak. Yeah, it's kind of crap. I don't know why you want to write it. And the project doesn't get any better. And, you know, my friend loses a friend. So, you know, it's painful to take feedback, you know, or it is for me anyway. I'm a delicate flower. But what I do is I give people early drafts of my work, and I usually people not in the business, right? So it's really helpful for people, just, you know, other people who read and go to the movies. So people. Um so what I'll do is I'll say, look, I'm a delicate flower. I don't want you to tell me if you like it or don't like it. It's far too early for that. But here's what I want you to tell me. Can you tell me whose story you think it is? You know, and could you tell me what you think is her life dream? You know, that all of this, Nicola, you know. So what do you think when we meet her? What is it that, you know, she or he wants? What do they dream about in their private moments, whether or not they think they could get it? And then I go, what do you think is the big struggle of the story? And by the way, I always give people outlines. I don't ask people to read like 100 pages. I'd give people like 4 or 5, maybe 10 pages max. But I'd be like, can you find me the paragraph where you feel like, you know, like, what were you hoping? What were you fearing? What did you think was the worst thing that could happen to him? What were you hoping she would get? What do you think like her fundamental flaw was? Like, can you answer these questions? And if my readers can't answer their questions, I don't think I've done my job yet, you know. But it also means like they
Yeah.
hand me back or sit down with me over a coffee and they answer the questions. And if they go, I don't know, I don't take offense. You know, they haven't hurt my feelings, but neither can they protect my feelings.
Yeah.
Because if they're giving me answers that were not what
Yeah.
I intended, I haven't done my job. But they can't protect me by, you know, if they can't find the answers, they can't, you know. So I think that's a really valuable process. But you need to kind of know what points you could be hitting, in order to know what questions to ask your readers to answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense. And some of the things you're saying just reminded me of you were saying, you know, too much backstory and too much stuff that you just don't really need to know. The writer needs to know that because they're writing the character, so they need to know all about their character, and it just reminds me of when we're starting out with novels and that a lot of writers starting out do that, and it's because they're working through getting to know who their character is, and we were always taught, you know, jump straight in. You don't need all that backstory. You just jump straight into the scene, and then we'll find that out. So that's interesting that people remember that on the screen.
Well, it must be so difficult.
I was thinking as you were talking was.
Sorry, we have a
sorry,
little
go ahead.
delay. Sorry. No, but it must be difficult when you write historical fiction and you've done like a ton of research and you're like, but that's so interesting, I want to put it in there, and it's like, can't find a place.
To me it is. Yeah, I hate if I'm reading and there's a ton of I've read stuff where people are just, they've done the research and they're putting it in, and you're like, it's so not necessary. So I'm always really conscious of not letting that take over because it's story driven or whatever. But one of the things I was thinking as you were speaking was coming to screenwriting from other sources of writing. A friend who's a screenwriter said to me recently, you have to understand it's a collaboration. So you can write your script, but that then goes out to the team or to the people you're going to be working with. It's going to get changed. You don't have, I think when you're writing novels or short stories or that kind of material, it's you and the page and maybe an editor. But when you're doing screenwriting, there's going to be so many other people working on it that's for me, I had to let go of that kind of, it's just me doing this. Do you see what I'm saying there? That I
do see what you're saying, and I also see why that would be for a lot of writers. Well, then I don't want to do it. Like, if you're going to come in here and monkey with what I'm doing, then I don't want to do it, you know. But here's the thing, there is a way of protecting yourself from that. You know, Rachel and I call each other script midwives, because there is a Hollywood term, script doctor, which is, we think, a very masculine term, you know, that like, I'm the surgeon and I'm going to come in here with my scalpel and I'll cut out what you don't need and I'll sew it up differently, you know, I'll take this and graft it on here. And we're like, hang on. We would far rather look at a project that somebody has written as something they are giving birth to. So we are trying to be, with that term of calling ourselves script midwives, really, really respectful of the fact that it's your baby, right? And we're not going to come along and, you know, perform a surgery on your baby. But what we can do is, like, we've seen this process literally thousands of times, and it can be scary and it can be painful, and we can make it less scary and less painful. What will happen is, when you write a screenplay, in the same way as, like, if, like, you're a successful novelist, right? But you wouldn't be a successful novelist if the story wasn't already working. So every single person along the way that's collaborating with a screenwriter is trying to make the project better, but it just doesn't feel like that to the writer. And actually, there are probably people along the way who are trying to make it a little bit their own. There are probably development execs that want to sit in the cinema and go, that was me, that was my line, I came up with that idea. I always laugh. Moulin Rouge is one of my favorite musicals, and I love the line in it where they're trying to get the money from the financier, and the big line they keep hitting hard is, you can even be involved artistically, you know. So the money people always want to be involved artistically, right? But assuming that most people in the world are well-meaning people, when people are coming in and saying, okay, we need to make changes to the screenplay, what they mean is, we want it to be as good as it can possibly be, right? That's what they mean. And producers want that because they have to bring it to the market, and they need it as good as it can possibly be so that they get some momentum behind it and a lot of people see it. And that's what you, the writer, want as well. So it is a much more collaborative medium, partly because it's so damn hard to get right, you know? So, I mean, one of the things, you'll know this, Nicola, like, you know, I do like 4 agreements with writers before, just quickly and verbally before I start working with them. But one of them is, are you willing to believe that the only reason that I or anyone in the meeting, in the development meeting, will make a comment is in the hope of making the whole thing better? And I've articulated that very clearly because screenwriters often do feel like, you're trying to mess me up. It's like, we're not, you know, but it's in the hope of making it better. And perhaps our note will be misguided. But here's how you protect yourself. The first thing you do is you make sure that it's really strong and that you understand what you're doing and that your own vision has got clarity before you bring it out to the world. Because when it's strong, somebody will go, hey, would this be a funny line? And you'll go, yes, I love it. You know, but they won't be, let's go back to scratch. You've picked the wrong character. You know, let's make it this person's. Hey, let's turn it into a comedy when you're like, it's not a comedy. You know, or let's stop it being a comedy when it was a comedy. You know, people will only monkey with it when you've brought something that you don't quite yet know what it is. And it's so exhausting to produce a screenplay. It's so exhausting to produce any writing that people often mistake the feeling of relief when you've completed a draft for it's done, you know? And I'm sorry, I'm giving a very long-winded answer, but I think it's worth it. I got to, you know, do a masterclass with Ed Solomon a few years ago. He wrote he wrote a bunch of beautiful movies. The things he's most famous for are Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, hilariously, and the third one, which is coming out now, The Men in Black, Charlie's Angels, which may not be his proudest moment, Now You See Me, like, you know, so a bunch of like massive movies. But I mean, he's a really truly humble person. Like he was saying, my most personal films are my least successful films. So what are you going to do with that, you know? But he said something really interesting, that he said, I work every day to try to become a better writer and a better human being. And I was like, I know what you mean to say, like a better writer, but how do you work on being a better human being? And he said, well, look, I have to take a lot of notes from people that, you know, never trained, like have never written anything, have never studied screenwriting. They just have power positions. So he's in the studio system. It's very different here in Ireland. If you're working with a producer or an executive in Ireland, it's somebody who is working for not very much money, putting themselves on the line to be part of the business, and they love story as much as you do. You can be sure of that, right? They're not here to make money. But he's working in the studio system. So he's like, I have to go in and I have to take notes from people that maybe I don't think, and they're not very sensitive to, you know, how difficult it is for me, you know, to take notes. But he says, what I do is I take a minute, like literally 60 seconds before I go into that meeting, and I think gratitude, compassion, gratitude, compassion, gratitude, compassion. He said gratitude because this person only has so much time on the planet and they're giving me this bit. So thank you. And I move myself to that place of being appreciative of that. And he goes, then I think compassion, because I think of all the stresses and strains that person is under in their job that I know of. And then I think of all the stresses and strains that that person is under that I don't know about. And I remember that, like, rejecting someone's note is like rejecting their effort at, you know, trying to collaborate creatively. But he's like, also, you know, they're probably not going to be in the room on their own. And if you reject someone's note, you humiliate them in front of their boss, or worse, you humiliate them in front of their underling. But he goes, even so, and he just pulled this out of the air. He was like, you go into the meeting and the executive, you know, will lead with, Susan, like, no, I don't think Susan should shoot the security guard in the bank robbery. And he's just like, the whole thing hinges on, like, what? The whole thing hinges on Susan shooting the security guard. Like, what are you talking about? That's why she has to go on the run and right? But he says, what you realize then is what they're he says, you look for the note behind the note. What they're actually saying is, you haven't introduced me to Susan in such a way that I believe she could or would. And then you go back and you show her as somebody who's got a hair trigger temper, or somebody who's panicky, or, you know, whatever it might be, somebody who can be riled by a particular thing, you know. And then
And
that's how you fix it. So you look for the note behind the note.
okay, I get you. So, but that's the thing about characters, isn't it? Like, I was thinking in prep for this, like the amount of TV or film you sit down and you watch and you're absolutely engrossed and you can't take your eyes off the screen. And equally, there's other things you sit down and within 5 minutes you are done. You're like, no, that is, I'm not continuing to watch that. Is that because of the characterization, or is it the dramatic tension, or what is it that hooks us in, and what is it that turns us off, do you think?
Those are great questions, and I don't think that there are like one size fits all answers, you know,
Yeah, I
because
know.
you know the thing, but there are things that are flops, and I would say, you know, Rachel and I go to a lot of film festivals. We're very often asked to do workshops at film festivals, and so we see a lot of movies, and we can tell you with kind of 97%, you know, accuracy which films are going to get even a distribution deal and which won't, you know. Um, but okay, the taste comes into it, but the things that almost always engage people are, nothing is as it seems, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes when I'm working with somebody, and you know, with respect, men are worse than this than women are, right? You know, but it's like, she's just, you know, she's just a 21-year-old girl, and I'm like, and what does she dream of? And it's like, getting a job, getting money, getting married, having children, what every 21-year-old dreams of. And I'm like, okay, she has no definition for me, you know, if it's all of those things. Like, but if what she dreams of is taking over the family business, which her father is planning to hand to her brother, now she's got definition for me, you know, like, so, like, I'm always looking for, she's not what I expected. He's not who he appears to be. So, like, the minute that a filmmaker or television maker shows you that, a peek behind the curtain is a lovely thing, you know, and you're like, ooh, okay. You know, but the other thing that we love is, here's somebody and here's a predicament. So, like, I always go back to this: who wants what, and why can't they have it? You know, I always go back to that. And, you know, the great Kurt Vonnegut will say, even if it's just a glass of water, you know, but look at somebody who wants something and is having difficulty getting it, and how do they go about solving their problems? Like, do they go, excuse, move? You know, like, it's like really interesting to see. And it's one of the things that, I mean, I think it's quite funny, like, you know, where we grew up, there was a bank that must have been poorly secured because it was constantly being robbed. I mean, I say constantly, like 3 times in 10 years, but that seems like a lot, right?
That is.
It seems like a lot. And like, when I would hear of, like, you know, somebody had robbed the bank down the road, and I'd think of the nice tellers. This was back in the day when you'd go and queue with your mother for her to lodge a check or whatever it might be. You'd think of all those nice people and how terrified they must have been, right? So I would be like, yeah. But in a movie, if somebody robs a bank, we're all on their side. Do you know what I mean? We're like, go for it, go for it, go for it. So, you know, the
Yeah.
other thing that I think, what we want to see is that people are going to be resourceful and original about how they solve their problems. So I think those two things are always compelling. So I'm always going, who? Tell me who they are. Give me a wink. Show me who they are when they're on their own. Show me a peek behind the curtain. What do they want? And why can't they have it? And then show me how they think they're going to get it, you know, and then, like, that's kind of the magic formula. That really is. If you took nothing else away from this talk, that's the magic formula. Who wants what and why can't they have it? You know,
Yeah.
is really, and that's kind of in a lot of novels, but not all. I mean, probably my favorite novel is Brideshead Revisited, and I think that's a meandering kind of a novel, you know, but I read it every year. I never get tired of it. But cinema and screen stories really require for the audience to watch somebody solving a problem. You know,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense.
Mm.
What because we're a good bit in now, so I just want to kind of maybe look at some of
The practical thing.
maybe people, yeah, like people who are watching who I'm sure, because we put this into the Film Network Ireland group, and I got quite a lot of bookings from that, so I know those people are coming from, they could have very good experience, or they could be technically minded and they're just looking at writing, and also I know that I have writers who are coming from more prose side, so probably different levels. But like, if you're starting out with maybe no experience of script writing, but you have other writing experience, where would you start? Is it a course? Is it a book? Is it a podcast? Is it getting the software? What would be the steps that you would take if you were in that position?
Well, I have been in that position, so here are the steps that I took. I read the books, so I won't list them all off. They are on our website. That's called adramatikimprovement.com. So we've listed those books there. There are 2 podcasts right now that are just amazing, and they are a cinematic education in and of themselves. One of them is called The Movies That Made Me. So it's Josh Olson, who wrote A History of Violence, and Joe Dante, who, directed a bunch of great movies. And they have a guest on. And they took this interesting thing that they don't ask people to talk about their own work. They ask people to talk about the movies that influenced them. And I swear to God, I was so glad for lockdown, because my project is I listen to that podcast and then I go and I watch the movies they're talking about. Some of them I'm watching them again, but now with new eyes, and then I listen to it again and I go, oh, okay, got it. Okay. So that is a cinematic education. And if you can't get yourself to a master's, save yourself the trouble. Just listen to that podcast and watch the movies that they're talking about, bearing in mind what they're saying about what they learned from them. I mean, there was such an interesting thing. They had William Friedkin, not a lovely human being apparently, but anyway, he did. I always forget the name, French Connection and The Exorcist and a bunch of those films. But they were saying, what are your favorite movie chases? Like, did you like the one in Bullet? Because he did the very famous cinema chase in The French Connection underneath the subway lines and the train lines. And he was like, no, Bullet is terrible. They just took all the cars off the roads of San Francisco and then they ran the cars over them. There are no obstacles. It's just spectacle. And it's not interesting. It doesn't require really any skill. And then he goes, the best chases, the best car chases, go back to Buster Keaton. He does the best. He's my favorite. He's my sweetheart too. So you'll learn a lot from listening to that podcast. And the other podcast that Josh Olson does with a comedian and comedy writer called Dave Anthony is called The West Wing Thing. And it's interesting because they started doing that podcast because they felt that the West Wing had a really pernicious effect on liberal politics 20 years ago, and that a lot of people in politics today say they were inspired by it and still are and rewatch it. And they were like, it's terrible, its politics are terrible. But as they started deconstructing it, so every week they deconstruct an episode, they always say, so let me say this, you don't need to have ever watched a single episode of The West Wing to follow along with the podcast, right? They'll play little clips of the things they want to look at. But because they're both writers, they can't help deconstructing the writing as well. And there are always fantastic nuggets in The West Wing Thing of what does and doesn't make a scene work or a storyline work or a character work, So that's, I think both of those are just great educations. Yeah.
I'll put those up because I have a page on my website after this because lots of people are giving me different resources and I want one place. So I'll link those.
Yeah.
Software, Mary Kate, when I was a couple of years ago, did a kind of starter course. And at the time I was looking at Final Draft and I just thought, no, I'm not there yet, but I bought it this year doing your course. So for anyone that has never written a script, why do you use a software and why can't you just say do it in Word? What's the benefit of that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that Rachel and I are always like outline, 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 outline. So do it in Word, do it in Word, do it in Word. Your story, like the fun bit is writing the scenes and, you know, the lines and the funny moments and da 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 da. But the thing will live and die on the outline. And also it's the thing that most people will read. And if you get the outline right, you know, the thing will write itself. And by the way, if you write a bang up outline, you could probably get some money, so you can then afford to buy a final draft, right?
Yeah.
But writing your actual script pages in Word is a mug's game. You can't possibly allow your creativity to flow. So, I mean, I just bit the bullet. And like this is, you know, whenever it was like 15, 16 years ago, I just bit the bullet. I do remember everyone in my family was like following Rachel into the film business. So I think we were able to get together with a few other people and we got a bundle there where we got 20% off. You get discounts if you're a student, or if you can get anyone who is a student or a lecturer, anyone affiliated with the third level, or even a school, actually, I'm pretty sure. So keep an eye on Final Draft. It is the industry standard. I believe there are others, and I'm not the best person to talk to about them. But like sometimes, but it's just that when you're writing, you know now, like when you're writing in the software, you just hit return and it knows you're going to write character, and then you hit return, it knows you're going to write dialogue, and then you hit return twice, you're back to action. And Rachel taught me how to use it, and she taught me in an hour. And I am,
Yeah.
as you may have seen earlier, maybe not the most adept at technology. So it's just worth it. Just say to yourselves, if you really are going to do this, if you're going to write pages, think of it as an investment in yourself, and it's going to repay you really soon. And writing generally is a very cheap occupation, you know, so it's worth.
Yeah, like that's that's great what you said there. So use Word for your outline, because that is what everything hinges on. And so don't be worrying really about the technology and all that, unless because you need to have your story in place first. That's really
I
there are
would say
when
I just want, yeah, but just also like you can get funded by Screen Ireland as a writer on your own based on an outline, you know, like
yeah,
there are other places where you could get funded and then you'll get like some, I can't remember, 5 grand, 10 grand, something like that. You will be like, woohoo, final draft for me and everyone in the family. And you can do that just from working in Word on your outline, as long as you
wow, yeah,
understand it's the architecture of the story that matters, you know?
that's very encouraging.
Yeah.
Just speaking of funding and where people go to look at these things, is Screen Skills Ireland, is that a good place, or and obviously
Screen Skills Ireland is the most extraordinary, brilliant, wonderful resource, and it's run by the most extraordinary, brilliant, wonderful team of absolutely dedicated civil servants. So if you're not signed up for Screen Skills Ireland, you should be. The other resource, which is unbelievably helpful, is the Writers Guild of Ireland. And if you are an aspiring writer, they have like an associate membership, which is really cheap. I think it's like €50 for the year. They do an amazing job. But the other thing that they do is they send out a newsletter 2 or 3 times a month. Maybe 1 or 2 times a month. But anyway, in it, they will have every funding opportunity, every writing competition, every producer who's looking for something, every training course that's coming up, they really are marvelous, So if you're not a member of the Writers Guild of Ireland, I'd encourage you to sign up. And if you are very poor at the moment, which a lot of people are under the circumstances, if you're cash poor at the moment, you could write to them and say, look, this is my situation. Can I receive your newsletter? Can I make a contribution, make an arrangement with them?
Yeah.
But it's really worth it.
2 other resources that I only kind of discovered this summer, and it's just through talking to other friends who are screenwriters or getting to know, because I didn't know anybody that was like working in screenwriting, and now I know a few, and the information I've gotten from them has helped me so much. And 2 sources were Facebook, the Film Network Ireland group. It's just a network of opportunities every day, and even just watching it, even if I don't apply, I'm just learning how things are worked. People are they could be looking for producers or writers or music people, and then there's competitions being shared, so you just get to see, oh, this is how it works, for somebody who's kind of no experience of it. So that's Film Network Ireland. I'll link that as well. And where is it? Oh, Film Freeway is another place for competitions. So if you have something that's ready to go and you're looking to enter into competitions, that's like a source where it's almost like submittable for novels. You put your work through that, but it lists all the competitions across the world. So it's very good as well.
Yeah, I would just say cautionary, a cautionary note. Some of those competitions are scams. Like, it's
Okay.
expensive to enter them. Everybody gets to the quarterfinals so that everybody then tweets and, posts that they've got to the quarterfinals. So that ups the brand of the competition. And like, I would just say there's a few reputable competitions. There are some that are disreputable. Rachel certainly was working with a writer who won one of those competitions and didn't realize in the small print that meant that the competition now owned his project,
Wow.
and they weren't in a position to get it made or to help him. They'd overpromised and he couldn't get it back. So just be careful of some of those things. But the blacklist, when you have something that's ready, is a fantastic thing. Argo got made out of the blacklist, Oscar winner,
Did it?
woo, straight to
Yeah.
the top. So, there are some reputable things, but I would check with other people before you throw money at things like that.
That's really good advice, because when you're new, you just don't know that. You just see it, just everything looks legit, and you put your work in. Is there any issue by putting your work out there that it can going to be taken or anything like that? Is there ever any issues, or should script writers need to worry about that?
You should register your work once you have a draft. I mean, apart from anything else, you should register your work because you get a tax break if you can get any money for it. So you register first with revenue, but you should register your work with the Writers Guild.
Okay.
It's extremely rare. Most people are like, someone's going to steal my idea, and the truth is that actually most people want to write what's coming out of them. They don't want to write what's coming out of you. Having said that, sometimes it happens and I don't know what you can do about that. I mean, I have a friend who's a brilliant filmmaker and he teaches a lot. And then I went to see this film and I was like, oh, he got his film made. Great. And then at the end, I was looking at the credits and I was like, he doesn't have a
Oh my
credit.
God.
And I got in touch with him and he went, yeah, straight up stolen. Like he brought it to a producer who just took it off him. And got another writer to do a new draft. But like I knew it. I had seen a draft 10 years earlier. I knew it was his story because it was so specific. And it was a pretty successful film. But I mean he wasn't protected enough. And it happened to me and Rachel. We wrote something
Okay.
and a producer was like, hey, can I see your stuff? And yeah, it was historical fiction like yours. It was based on a true story. We had no comeback. So we just
Yeah,
had to
gosh,
go. That was
just
the
be
way
careful, I
that
suppose.
cookie
Yeah.
crumbles.
God.
Yeah, but I
Oh,
mean, yeah, I think, look, it happens extremely, extremely rarely, So I think
okay. Yeah.
don't use it as an excuse not to share your work, I would say.
Yeah. No, I get you. And
Rachel
we've a
might
few
have some
questions.
advice in the chat. Yeah.
I'm just going to go through. There's not that many. I'll just go through them quickly, and then I just want to finish up with the upcoming courses that you have. So,
Mhm.
Judith asked, "Is there any way to know if your idea is a film or a novel?"
I would look at the narrative engine. So, does it feel like somebody wants something very badly and is having great difficulty getting it? There are lots of things that work great as both, but I would look at the narrative engine. And the other thing I would say is it like the story of a big clan, then it's probably a novel. Whereas if it's a one person story, it's gonna fit into film better.
And you told me short stories make the best to screen, don't they, or can do,
Yeah, because novels are
compared to
like way,
novels,
way,
say.
way, way, way more. Like you can't get all of a novel into, even a 3 hour movie. They're about to try again with Dune. Good luck. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited for it. But you can't get it all, and so it's a very difficult thing to adapt a novel. Whereas with a short story, you've got actually about the right amount of material. So if you guys like if you are there are people there who like writing short stories, you almost certainly have the makings of a feature film, never mind a short, so,
Yeah.
but so things like Brokeback Mountain, that came from a long short story or a short novella, but it's always easier to expand out than to hack away and leave three
Yeah.
quarters of your story on the floor,
Yeah.
when especially when a novelist tries to adapt their own work.
As I well know. A question, please. How to sustain a story? I have co-written short films, but tend to run out of steam for plot ideas over a full feature-length script. Thanks. That's from Ruth.
Plot twists. So let's just say, like, take something very simple, like, you know, somebody wants to break out of prison, so it's like, okay, then they have their plan in place. So what are they going to do? They're going to bribe this guard, they're going to steal this key, they're going to have the laundry van waiting, right? So then what you have to do is you've got to go, the guard gets appendicitis and isn't there that night, the prison, key system is upgraded, now it's electronic, the security system, that, the laundry van doesn't arrive, whatever. So it's just, you go, point the audience in this direction, and then no, something else is going to happen. So we talk about rising action. Things just have to keep getting harder for your character. And that's
one thing I was just thinking there, because for me, if feature is so daunting, it's so much work even to outline it and work in it. So maybe people should consider shorts as just a step in. Well, this is what I found helpful anyway, that it didn't seem, I could sit down and write my outline of it, I could write the pages of it, and I could test it and even just have something finished and go, okay, I've done that now. I don't know, do you not think that's a good idea?
Oh, I do think it's a great idea. No, I think that's a brilliant idea. I've just almost never been able to come up with a good idea for a short film. I think it's an art form in itself. And I think for me, hey, guess what? You've just heard me talking for nearly an hour. So like, I'm quite verbose. So for me to like do it in 15 pages or 12 pages or 10 pages is way harder, But if you've got an idea for a short film, it's a brilliant way to break in. And, if you've got an idea for a short film, that's gold. But the way that, Rachel and I always work on stories is we break it down, so I don't want to go into all of this right now, but there are, sequences in stories that are like, in screen stories that are like chapters in books or verses in poems. So the first thing we do in outline is we go, what's each sequence? I can't write like 90 pages. I will get lost trying to write 90 pages. But I always say, but I can write 15 pages 8 times. I can do that. I can write, I can't write 120 pages, but I can write 15 pages 8 times. So that's the trick of that, I think, for it not to be daunting. I mean, Rachel always talks about a writer she worked with who was like, it's writing itself. But that it wasn't writing itself. She had kept him at outline until the outline was really tight. He had done all the work. He didn't think he was, because he was like, I want to write the pages. And I was like that as well when I started out. I didn't feel like I was really writing until I got to write pages. But it's actually, you do it all at outline and then it writes itself.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions on outline, but I think that's, you need to kind of maybe do the course to look at that. There's too much, I think, just right now to go into outline, but there is a question on it. How many pages are the norm for an outline?
Well, I would say less than 4 looks a bit skimpy, and more than 10 and people go, okay. So, between 5 and 8 is usual, like mine usually work out about 8 because I think in sequences. But it is important for people to know this, because it's the opposite of your primary school teacher. Do you remember when you were trying to skimp on your homework and you'd write like really big because you had to write 4 pages or whatever, right? So sometimes people feel like I'm producing loads of pages, therefore, I'm showing that I'm doing a good job. Almost everybody that works in the industry who can help you is so overloaded with reading, they want it to be shorter. So don't feel like it was helpful to give us a 30-page outline. We will all be like, and it's the same with a really long script,
Yeah.
So I would say not more than 10. Yeah.
There's I just want to, because it's time to finish, and there's a question that, tell me more about sequences. Well, I think if you want to know about sequences, you should look to the course that you've coming up, Mary Kate, with a dramatic improvement. There's 29th of September, you're starting Screenwriting 101. That's idea to outline.
So that's when that's for anyone who's like, I haven't, or I've got some, I mean, it may be for people have written a couple of things, but they're like, I need to be kept on a deadline, so, but it's something where you're still more open. And then the advanced screenwriting, you have the dates there.
Yeah, it's the 4th of October. 4th of October, scene writing is the secret weapon. That's what's on your website. And then the advanced screenwriting program is in a 2-to-1 basis. Is that something that you contact you to book direct?
Yeah, you contact us for all of these, you know, and these are all online offerings. That is just what we're doing at the moment because we can't be in the room with people, which we really miss. But the advanced screenwriting is for people who already know their craft, you know. But I just think the thing you were talking about, like Charlie Chaplin, like the difference between, you know, an okay scene and a great scene is the difference between a story really singing and just being all right, you know. So
Yeah.
that's for people who've already got some experience or some training. Uh, so yeah, and the sequences thing, I think you can hear me on it on Rachel on an FNI podcast. Actually, I think we go into more
Okay.
detail.
Great. Okay. Well, look, I mean, I started out I did the advanced screenwriting with you in the summer through the Irish Writer Centre, and then realized I shouldn't have been on the advanced. I needed to go back, and I did the outline, the what is it called, idea to outline, and I just honestly by the end of it I just felt like now I can go and do that, whereas at the start of the summer I just felt clueless, and even though I knew I could write, I knew I could do all that stuff, I just didn't know how. And I think your way of teaching, it's more understanding that it's all about the story and your characters, and you give us techniques to how to get your story out successfully on screen. So that was my experience. I really, really enjoyed it, but I took a lot more from it than not just like, oh, I know how to do that now. It was all about the fundamentals of story that I think still bringing through in my other writing as well. So that's my recommendation. Having done the course, I loved it.
I would hope that like what we're interested in is story, and that's why it's going. And the technical stuff, don't worry about that. You can learn that in an afternoon. Do you know? Those are like that can be daunting for people, but they don't really have to worry about that. What Rachel and I love is story in all its forms. We love telling stories verbally. We love reading. But we're particularly in love with cinema and television. And if there are people here who want to earn a living as a writer, this is a pity. But the truth is, there are only a few people that are going to earn their living as writing novels, you know, because there are way fewer people consuming books. But it is an absolute gold rush in screenwriting right now. You know, all of those platforms are proliferating, and the old platforms are not going away. Cinema's not going away. BBC's not going away. NBC's not going away. It is a gold rush. So
yeah,
if
that's
you
so
want,
positive though. It's so as a writer, that's so
you know,
exciting.
it really is so exciting. It's a fantastic time. And I mean, I just also want to say this. People are sometimes like, I left it too late. No, you didn't. You know, people with a few more years of life under their belt are great writers, and the screen doesn't care how old you are, you know. So like if you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s, like bring it, you know. People still want to hear your stories, and you've probably got a really interesting worldview, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Well,
it's a gold rush. So if people are writing for a hobby, you know, write whatever you want. But if you want to earn a living, get into television and film.
you want to see your work out there as well. It's not just about the money. It is about seeing your work out there, and it's just, I don't know, so exciting. I think to be even looking towards, you know, getting your stuff there. So
Well,
I just
that's
want to
true,
say
yeah,
thanks.
because none of us are going to be like, you know, well, not many of us are going to be millionaires. You know, again, it's a bit like acting. You know, only a few people are going to the Oscars and buying the, you know, massive villas. But if you're earning your living doing what you love, then what a blessing. That like what a
Yeah.
lovely thing that is to do, and you can do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a million for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. And I think people are going to take lots from it. And a lot of things that we talked about, I'm going to put up on my own website this week. If you keep an eye on it, it's nicolacassidy.com. And we've got 2 more sessions coming up in the month. That's the novel and the podcast. So you can book that through the website. And to look at Mary Kate's work or her workshops coming up, it's at dramatikimprovement.com, and they're also on Facebook under A Dramatic Improvement. So that's it for today. Thanks a million, Mary Kate.
Thanks a million, Nicola.
Hopefully you might see some more of the people now that were on today.
Sorry for the tech issues at the beginning, but thank you so
It
much.
worked, thank God.
Lovely to see you again.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks a million.
Bye.